The meeting room fell silent the moment Mitch slapped a thick folder onto the conference table. His voice carried the kind of artificial gravity that managers practice in HR seminars, and he made sure every pair of eyes was on him before speaking. "You're under internal investigation," he announced, his gaze sweeping the room before landing squarely on me with undisguised satisfaction. The effect was immediate. Colleagues who had eaten lunch with me every day for nearly a year shifted in unison, putting a safe distance between us as though my chair had caught fire. 11 months of shared deadlines, office jokes, and coffee breaks dissolved in a heartbeat. I asked evenly. For what? Exactly. Mitch relished the moment, ticking off accusations as though they were bullet points on a performance review: unauthorized system access, data transfers at odd hours, excessive interest in accounts outside my department. His tone was theatrical, savoring the words. Around me, people avoided my eyes. Dina, who had borrowed my stapler that morning, suddenly found her notepad fascinating. Raj, who had invited me to his daughter's birthday last week, studied his watch as though it held the secrets of the universe. "We've been monitoring you for weeks," Mitch continued, smug satisfaction curling his lips. "The evidence is substantial." He slid a document across the table. "Sign this. It's a simple admission of improper conduct. We'll handle this discreetly. 2 weeks severance." Otherwise, he didn't finish the threat. But the implication was clear. My palms were damp, not from fear, but calculation. This confrontation had come 3 weeks ahead of schedule. I met his eyes. "I'd like to see the evidence." "That's not how this works," Mitch snapped. I reached calmly for my phone. He leaned forward sharply. "This isn't a negotiation. You don't get to call anyone." I ignored him and dialed. "Hello. This is Agent Hayes. The bridge is compromised." I repeat, the bridge is compromised. Confusion rippled through the room. Mitch lunged across the table for my phone. I sidestepped, raising my voice. "Code yellow at location Sunflower. Request immediate backup." Chairs scraped as supervisors bolted for the doors. Managers scrambled. My so-called colleagues froze between horror and disbelief. Mitch shouted that I was bluffing, but the thunder of boots in the hallway silenced him. Federal agents poured into the room. My team. My real team. The people I had worked alongside in secret for nearly a year. The agents fanned out, their commands sharp and practiced. Handcuffs clinked. Mitch's face drained of color. The realization in his eyes was the moment I had been waiting for. He wasn't untouchable after all. Justice was finally closing in on him and the others who had quietly siphoned away millions from people who never even knew they were victims. But this was far from the end. It was only the beginning. My name wasn't Anna Wilson, the mild accountant my colleagues thought they knew. I was Eliza Hayes, forensic accountant turned federal agent specializing in financial crimes. 11 months earlier, I had walked into Alpine Financial Services under a false identity, equipped with nothing more than a wire, a fabricated resume, and the determination to dismantle the fraud from within. I hadn't chosen this career path lightly. Years ago, I had watched my grandparents lose their retirement savings to a financial advisor they trusted. He vanished overnight, leaving them destitute. My father, already working 2 jobs, shouldered the impossible burden of rebuilding. That sense of helplessness carved itself into me, leaving behind a steel resolve that someday I would prevent others from suffering the same. When complaints about Alpine began piling up in our office, the patterns were all too familiar. Teachers, nurses, and construction workers were reporting mysterious fees and vanishing funds. Most amounts were small, just enough for victims to dismiss as bookkeeping errors or their own mistakes. But I knew better. Nobody steals $50 unless they're stealing $50 from thousands of people. Within 3 weeks, I had uncovered something bigger than even our unit had expected, a scheme meticulously designed to target the vulnerable immigrants with language barriers, elderly customers hesitant to challenge authority, and young adults new to financial systems. Normally, financial crimes were investigated with warrants and subpoenas. But Alpine's executives had left almost no paper trail. The only way to expose them was to infiltrate from the inside. And so Anna Wilson was born. Getting hired was simple. Playing the role was harder. I learned quickly to make myself useful without drawing suspicion. I made coffee runs, volunteered for tedious assignments, remembered birthdays. I was the office friend reliable, sympathetic, forgettable. Behind the facade, I traced money trails and documented Mitch's system. It was ingenious in its simplicity. Administrative fees that appeared and vanished, leaving a sliver behind. Systematic rounding errors always in the bank's favor. Each method small, almost invisible, but multiplied across thousands of accounts. It added up to millions. The stolen money moved through internal transfers into shell companies, reappearing as executive bonuses and luxury perks. By month 3, I confirmed the fraud. By month 6, I identified the major players. By month 9, I mapped the entire laundering path. We planned to close the operation at the 1-year mark with evidence strong enough to secure convictions. But Mitch's suspicion accelerated everything. A routine security scan had flagged my late-night access, and Mitch, paranoid and ruthless, decided to eliminate the threat before it grew. He had done this before. Over the years, 3 employees had been publicly accused of misconduct and quietly forced out, a warning to anyone else who dared ask questions. This time, however, he chose the wrong target. As agents escorted him away in handcuffs, my cover disintegrated. Colleagues who had once trusted me now stared as though I were a stranger. In truth, I wasn't the woman who brainstormed with Raj about his daughter's science project or cheered with Dina when she finally received a positive pregnancy test. Those relationships had been carefully constructed masks, yet losing them left me strangely hollow. The adrenaline of the takedown drained quickly. Hours later, sitting in the debriefing room, I could barely hold the coffee Agent Rodriguez slid toward me. "You did good work, Hayes," he said. 8 months of evidence. 17 individuals identified. 12 million siphoned. The customers, I asked, when do they get their money back? Asset recovery is already on it. The hard part will be finding everyone. Victims like Mrs. Loretta Chen, who had been dismissed as forgetful when she questioned her balance, or Daniel Ortiz, made to feel financially illiterate for pointing out unusual charges. Ordinary people whose shame had been weaponized against them. This was just the beginning. Prosecutions take years. Defense attorneys fight dirty. And men like Mitch rarely fall alone. As I stared at the cold coffee in my hand, I knew the hardest battles were still ahead. The months that followed were consumed by trial preparation. Meetings with prosecutors stretched late into the evening. Evidence was cataloged, testimony rehearsed, and strategies debated until exhaustion blurred one day into the next. The case had already grown beyond Alpine Financial. 2 partner institutions were implicated in the money trail, and what began as 17 defendants expanded to 23. I was back to being Agent Hayes, but Anna Wilson lingered in unexpected ways. Sometimes I would catch myself responding to her name. Sometimes I reached instinctively for the subtle makeup that softened my features into hers. A false identity had become muscle memory, a ghost haunting my reflection. 6 weeks after the takedown, Rodriguez knocked on my office door. His expression told me before his words did. "Heads up, Mitch hired Griffin Perry." My stomach dropped. Perry was a defense attorney infamous for discrediting witnesses and manipulating juries. "What's the angle?" I asked. "They're claiming entrapment," Rodriguez said. "They've filed motions to suppress evidence, arguing the undercover operation wasn't properly authorized." "That's ridiculous. We followed every protocol." "Of course we did. But they don't need to prove misconduct. Just create doubt." "And Perry's also digging into your past. He's trying to spin your grandparents' situation into a personal vendetta." I set my pen down. "That was 20 years ago." "Doesn't matter. Perry wants to paint you as biased, not impartial." That night, leaving the federal building, I was startled by a black sedan pulling alongside the curb. The window rolled down to reveal Raj, my former colleague. Anna, I mean. "Agent Hayes, can we talk?" Against better judgment, I got in. He spoke quickly, nervously. "I swear I didn't know about any of it. Some of us have been questioned, and now they're saying we should have noticed. My wife thinks I could be charged. We've got another baby coming in December." His hands shook on the steering wheel. I reassured him that cooperating honestly would protect him, but he wasn't finished. "Dina got a call from Mitch, from jail. He was asking about you, what you accessed, who you talked to, and Hayes. It's not just him. Executives from one of the partner banks keep calling the office. They're obsessed with backups, archives, like they're scrambling to cover something." I urged him to tell the prosecution team everything. Later that week, our fears sharpened into reality. A key witness, the former IT director who had agreed to testify about Alpine's fee system, was found unconscious from carbon monoxide poisoning. The police called it an accident. The prosecution wasn't convinced. He survived, but his memory was impaired, and his testimony compromised. Protective arrangements were ordered for other witnesses. I was given additional security, even a temporary relocation. Rodriguez tried to reassure me. "They're desperate. That means our case is strong." But the truth gnawed at me. Desperation made people dangerous. The defense strategy became clear during the preliminary hearing. Perry pulled out internal emails between my supervisor and me from before the operation, lines that, in context, were harmless, but in his hands became weapons. He read aloud, "I've seen this pattern before. It destroyed my family. I won't let it happen to others." On the stand, I kept my voice steady. My judgment was impartial. The evidence speaks for itself. But Perry's smirk said otherwise. "Evidence you selectively gathered, while living as someone else? How convenient." By the time I stepped down, my credibility had been cracked, if not shattered. I knew the evidence trail was still strong, but the defense had succeeded in planting seeds of doubt. And somehow, Perry had obtained emails that should have been sealed. That night, a text arrived from an unknown number, parking level 3, blue sedan, 10 minutes, come alone. Every training protocol screamed against it, yet something compelled me, weapon holstered at my side. I descended into the dimly lit garage. The blue sedan was there, engine off. As I approached, the door opened. Dina stepped out. Gone was the smiling coworker I had once shared lunches with. Her face was pale, eyes darting nervously. "I shouldn't be here, but I can't sleep. I keep seeing her face." "Who's—" "Mrs. Reynolds. The old woman who came in crying because her account was short again. Mitch had me tell her she was misremembering. She died 2 months later. Her son said she'd been skipping medication because she couldn't afford it. She handed me a USB drive and a notepad. This should have been destroyed during the system upgrade. It's the original programming directive, with Mitch's annotations. And these are logs of his calls from detention. 3 to someone named Jerome at Westward Partners." My pulse quickened. Westward Partners was the investment firm we suspected of laundering the proceeds. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. Her voice cracked. "Because yesterday, Someone left a picture of my house on my windshield. No note, just the picture. After she disappeared into the night, I rushed the materials to Rodriguez. The evidence was damning, linking Mitch directly to the fraudulent system and potentially tying it to Westward Partners. "This changes everything," Rodriguez said grimly. We immediately arranged protective custody for Dina, but when agents arrived at her home, she was gone, her phone abandoned, her husband baffled. She had left suddenly, telling him to take their daughter upstate. By the next afternoon, Perry withdrew several motions, and 3 defendants sought cooperation deals. The defense was fracturing, yet the victory was soured by the hollow space where Dina should have been. A day later, her car was discovered at a bus station miles away. Inside were stacks of annotated account statements, more evidence, but no sign of her. That night, my buzzer rang. A courier handed me a certified envelope. Inside was a single address, a date, and a time. 9:10 p.m. Tomorrow. Every instinct told me it was a trap. Yet when another anonymous text warned, "Jerome knows about Hayes, not just Anna," I realized my real identity had been compromised. At 8:55 p.m., against orders, I approached the warehouse listed on the note. The building was dark, seemingly abandoned. Inside, a single chair sat in the middle of the floor with a manila envelope on it. I opened it. A USB drive. A note scrawled with the words, "The account connections you couldn't find. Run." The hiss of gas filled the room before I even processed the warning. The sharp hiss filled the air, and my lungs seized almost instantly. I staggered toward the exit, but the door was locked from the outside. My vision blurred, spots of light swimming in the corners as the chemical stench grew overwhelming. The note's final word echoed in my head, "Run," as though mocking me. I pounded on the door, my strength ebbing. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, and then the world went black. When I awoke, the sterile white of a hospital ceiling swam into focus. Oxygen burned my throat as it forced life back into me. Rodriguez sat nearby, his face drawn but fierce. "You disobeyed orders," he said hoarsely, then softened. "But it turns out you brought us something invaluable. That drive holds the roadmap we've been missing the entire money trail through Alpine, Westward Partners, and Pinnacle Trust. Dates, accounts, transfers, everything." I closed my eyes in relief and dread. Whoever had left that envelope had saved me and also wanted me silenced. "Do we know who?" I asked. Rodriguez shook his head. "But they also called in the gas leak to emergency services. That's why you're alive." As I recovered, the case against Mitch and his associates swelled with new momentum. Witnesses once hesitant now stepped forward. Former employees revealed how compartmentalization kept them ignorant of the full scheme. Piece by piece, the puzzle widened, but unease stalked me. Someone had orchestrated that near-fatal trap. Someone powerful enough to arrange attacks, suppress evidence, and anticipate our moves. And when Jerome Wilcox, the CEO of Westward Partners, was found dead in his vacation home weeks later, an apparent suicide with a too-perfect confession note, my instincts screamed. It was too neat, too convenient. The following morning, I received a call cloaked in electronic distortion. "The game isn't over," the voice warned. "Check the witness list tomorrow." Then silence. And there it was, an amendment adding Dina Miller to the defense witness list. My breath caught. Dina, who had once handed me the very evidence that broke the case open, was now aligned with them. The prosecution scrambled. "If she testifies for them, we lose credibility across the board," said Vivian, the lead prosecutor. She was our linchpin. That evening, Another delivery came to my building, a hotel key card with the number 7114 written on it. This time, I alerted Rodriguez but still went. Inside the room, a burner phone buzzed to life as soon as I stepped in. "You came alone," the voice on the line asked. Despite the distortion, I knew it instantly. "Dina, where are you?" "Not important. Listen, tomorrow in court, you need to ask me about Account Review Protocol 16. Push me on it." "What is Protocol 16? Her voice trembled. "It doesn't exist. That's the point. When I hesitate, you'll know. Then keep pressing. And Hayes, they have my daughter. They've been watching her schoolyard. This is the only way I can keep her safe and still fight back." The call ended abruptly, leaving me with more fear than clarity. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with media, reporters sensing the high stakes. Mitch sat at the defense table, immaculate and smug even in detention blues. When Dina entered, I almost didn't recognize her. The warm, frazzled coworker was gone. She moved like a marionette, her face blank, her eyes never lingering. The defense attorney guided her through testimony that dismantled months of our work. She claimed the fees were standard practice, that any anomalies were user error or system quirks. For 40 minutes, she chipped away at our foundation until the case seemed ready to crumble. Then Vivian glanced at me, the signal we'd planned. I scribbled the question, slid it across. "Miss Miller," Vivian said smoothly, "you were responsible for implementing Account Review Protocol 16, correct?" Dina faltered, a single crack in her armor. I'm not familiar with that protocol." "Really, it was part of the quarterly compliance checks, wasn't it?" "No, there was no such." She stopped, eyes flickering toward Mitch at the defense table. "Are you certain?" Vivian pressed. "Because we have documentation." She carried a manila folder to the witness stand, though it contained nothing. Dina's hand trembled as she reached for it. Something shifted in her expression. "There was no Protocol 16, she said finally, her voice steadier. "But there was another system. One that Mitch required certain employees to implement off the books." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The defense shouted objections, but the judge allowed her to continue. What poured out next was 2 hours of devastating testimony. She described in meticulous detail how Mitch had orchestrated the fraud, how bonuses and threats kept employees compliant, how compartmentalization ensured nobody could see the full picture. "And why testify now?" Vivian asked softly. Dina's gaze locked on Mitch. "Because my daughter deserves to see honesty, even when it's terrifying." The defense floundered. Their star witness had detonated their case. At adjournment, Dinah was swept into protective custody with her family, for the first time in weeks. We tasted victory. But celebrations were cut short that evening when a Justice Department official strode into our war room flanked by internal affairs officers. "We have a problem," he announced. The defense filed a motion alleging witness coaching and evidence tampering. He placed photos on the table, grainy hotel footage of me entering room 714. "Agent Hayes," the officer said, "did you meet with defense witness Dina Miller outside of protocol?" The trap snapped shut. If I admitted it, I risked disqualification and tainting the case. If I denied it, the footage would brand me a liar. I chose the narrow truth. She contacted me. She said her testimony was being coerced. She feared for her child. The official sighed. "Regardless, the judge has ordered a hearing. Until then, Agent Hayes, you are suspended from case activities." Rodriguez waited until they left, his voice low and grim. "This was coordinated. Whoever left that hotel card knew exactly how to set you up." And I knew, with icy certainty, that the enemy wasn't just Mitch. Someone higher was pulling strings, playing a game we barely understood. The courtroom the next morning was suffocating. I sat at the back, sidelined, while the defense painted me as a rogue agent with a vendetta, willing to manipulate evidence and witnesses to avenge my grandparents. Perry's voice rang with smug authority as he spun my year of undercover work into a crusade of personal revenge. When the prosecution countered with Dina's testimony about coercion, the defense produced phone records showing she had initiated contact with me. The judge listened grimly, then delivered a compromise. I would be removed from the case, and the jury instructed to view my testimony with caution, but the financial records and other evidence would remain admissible. It saved the case, but gutted me. My professional reputation was scarred, and worse, I was cut off from the work I had sacrificed nearly a year of my life for. As I left the stand, Mitch's eyes found mine. His faint smile wasn't triumph. It was calculation, a promise that this battle was far from over. Rodriguez caught up with me outside. We still have a strong case. Dana's testimony yesterday was powerful. The records speak for themselves. I shook my head. This feels like misdirection. They didn't just want me off the case. They wanted me isolated. Hours later, Rodriguez's phone buzzed with an update that confirmed my fears. The secure facility where our evidence servers were stored had been breached. Nothing appeared missing, but the systems had been offline for 20 minutes. Long enough for subtle sabotage. Over the next week, that suspicion became reality. From my enforced distance, I watched reports of the trial. Evidence that had once been airtight suddenly appeared inconsistent. Dates didn't match. Transactions shifted. Witnesses looked confused when their testimony contradicted the altered records. On the 8th day, Rodriguez defied orders and came to my apartment. His face was pale. They tampered with the servers. Both sets the backups too. The evidence is compromised. Before I could respond, I noticed the faint chemical scent in the air, the sudden weight in my lungs. Rodriguez's eyes widened. Out, he gasped. We stumbled to the hallway, collapsing as the world dimmed again. When I came to, paramedics were shouting above me. Rodriguez was on a stretcher nearby, oxygen mask over his face. Agent down, move. Move, someone barked. Later, in the hospital, Rodriguez leaned close. It was hydrogen cyanide, professional grade, pumped into your ventilation. Haze. This goes higher than Mitch. Much higher. Within hours, protocols I couldn't override were activated. I was scheduled for immediate relocation, a new identity, complete isolation until the trial concluded. My world shrank to a countdown. They're winning, I whispered. First they discredit me, then corrupt the evidence. Now they'll bury me in a safe house while the case collapses. Not if we change the game, Rodriguez said, handing me his personal phone. You've got 15 minutes before they transfer you. Make them count. I called Vivian, the lead prosecutor. I shouldn't even be speaking to you, she began. Listen first. The regulatory backups, I said urgently. Alpine transmitted daily transaction data to the Federal Reserve. Those records can expose tampering. They're sealed. We'd need weeks for authorization, she argued. Not if we go through someone who already had access. Jerome's assistant, Penny Atkins. Vivian hesitated. She quit before Jerome's death. She vanished. Then find her, I insisted. She knows where the bodies are buried. After the call, Rodriguez helped me track her down. We dug through obituaries, property records, scraps of digital residue until we located her childhood town. With a welfare check arranged through the local police, we finally made contact. The chief called back. She's fine, but spooked. She asked if this was about Agent Hayes. Then she gave us a string of numbers. When he read them off, I recognized the format, a timestamp. September 17th, 2014 at 3:42:07 p.m. I remembered Penny once complaining during a system migration about manually re-entering thousands of accounts. That timestamp marked the exact moment the fraudulent protocol was embedded. Rodriguez pulled regulatory backups from that day, and there it was, the activation of the adjustment system. The authorization bore a name we hadn't seen before, Lawrence Keller, board chairman. Keller left Alpine 5 years ago, Rodriguez muttered, typing furiously. He's at the Federal Banking Commission now. It clicked like ice water down my spine. Keller hadn't just built the fraud, he'd moved into the very body meant to regulate it. He had been shielding Alpine all along, warning them, feeding them inside knowledge. He was the invisible hand behind every sabotage, every trap. This case wasn't about one corrupt financial firm anymore. It was about systemic rot reaching into federal oversight itself. Before we could act, the protective detail arrived. My time was up. Rodriguez promised as I was escorted out. I'll take this higher. To people Keller can't touch. For 2 suffocating weeks, I lived under a new name in a safe house, cut off from news and updates, imagining the worst, that the case had crumbled, that Keller had escaped justice. Then one morning, my handler handed me a burner phone. 5 minutes. He said, "It was Vivian. Plea deals this morning." She told me. Mitch and 14 others. Full cooperation. I gripped the phone tighter. What changed? You did. Or rather, what you started? Keller was arrested yesterday. 3 other commission officials, too. The backups led us to him. Tears blurred my vision. So it's over. Not yet. But the system Keller built is coming down. For the first time in months, hope outweighed fear. 3 days later, I was escorted back into the Justice Department. Rodriguez was waiting in a quiet conference room, a thick folder already laid out for me. "Thought you might want to see this before the press conference," he said. Inside were plea agreements, cooperation statements, restitution plans. But something was missing. "Where's the Keller evidence?" "The backups?" I asked. Rodriguez smiled and slid me a flash drive. "We never needed them." He plugged it in. A video played. Penny Atkins sat in a modest kitchen, looking directly into the camera. "My name is Penelope Harrison, formerly executive assistant to Jerome Wilcox. For 8 years, I witnessed and facilitated a massive financial fraud orchestrated by Lawrence Keller. For 40 minutes, she laid it bare: documents, logs, testimony she had secretly collected for years. She explained how Keller positioned himself at the commission to shield the scheme, how Jerome wavered and died after refusing to stay silent, and how threats drove her into hiding. She ended with a warning. "If you're watching this, it means Keller tried to bury the truth again. This time, he won't succeed." Rodriguez explained, she didn't trust official channels while Keller held power. So she sent the video to every Alpine board member, every major investor, every media outlet. The whole house of cards collapsed overnight. Board members scrambled to cooperate. Executives turned on one another. Keller tried to flee, but was caught at a private airfield. Faced with Penny's records, he cracked, naming other officials involved. 2 months later, I stood in the back of a packed courtroom as Keller received a 20-year sentence for fraud, corruption, and obstruction. Mitch and his inner circle had already been handed terms ranging from 5 to 15 years. But the real triumph came when the judge announced a restitution fund for more than 1,200 victims. People like Mrs. Chen and Daniel Ortiz would finally see their stolen money returned. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I kept my distance, letting the prosecutors take the spotlight. My father's voice echoed in my memory when I called him that evening. "Your grandparents would be proud," he said, his voice thick. "Not just of what you accomplished, but how you did it by standing for what's right. The system Keller built had been dismantled, but more importantly, it had been exposed. The Federal Banking Commission underwent a sweeping restructure, with new oversight to prevent corruption of that scale again. Alpine Financial was dissolved, its assets redistributed to institutions with verified ethical practices. For me, the greatest satisfaction wasn't watching Keller led away in cuffs. It came months later, sitting across from elderly victims as I delivered restitution checks in person, watching disbelief melt into relief, knowing their stolen dignity was restored. That was justice. Mitch, Keller, and the rest had lost everything: their money, reputations, and freedom. But their greatest loss was power. They would spend years behind bars with nothing but time to reflect on how completely they had been undone. Not by violence or vengeance, but by persistence, by truth, by the quiet force of justice that refuses to stay buried. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, slowly unraveling the lies until the truth stands undeniable. That was the lesson I carried forward even in a world corrupted by greed and manipulation. Integrity, unyielding and patient, remains the sharpest weapon. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What are your thoughts on holding corporations accountable when they betray the trust of ordinary people? I read every single one.